They canceled my utilities behind my back, thinking I wouldn't notice my own son Dale was behind it, using my name to drain everything I'd worked for. I had spent my life raising him, loving him, but in that moment I realized he wasn't my son anymore. In the courtroom, I turned his betrayal into his downfall. What he thought was his win became his loss, and when the judge saw the truth, Dale wasn't just losing power, he was losing his place in my life forever. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Marilyn Kruger pulled the quilt up to her chin, but the chill bit through the fabric like a set of sharp teeth. The air in her Hickory Ranch house felt closer to the weather outside than inside. Her breath puffed in front of her like smoke, hanging visible in the dim morning gray. At 68, her bones registered the temperature before her eyes even focused on the cracked ceiling she had stared at for years. She swung her legs out of bed, the hardwood floor icy under her bare feet. A faint ache ran up her calves, the kind she used to shake off when she was younger. But today it stayed, heavy and constant. Crossing the small hallway, she pressed the thermostat. The screen was blank. She tapped it again, harder. Nothing. Marilyn shuffled to the kitchen and flipped the light switch. Darkness held steady. The refrigerator gave no hum, only silence. She turned the faucet. No water, just a hollow gasp from the pipes. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She went straight to the breaker box in the laundry nook. Every switch lined up, untouched. No popped breakers, no tripped fuses. Everything exactly how it should be. That was the moment she knew, this wasn't some accident of weather or faulty wiring. Someone had shut her down. Her hands shook as she dialed the utility company, clinging to the landline she still kept for emergencies. A polite woman on the other end looked up her account. Yes, Mrs. Kruger. According to our records, you requested a full shutoff of services effective yesterday at 5 p.m. Marilyn gripped the phone tighter. I did no such thing. The voice came back apologetic but unmoved. Well, ma'am, the paperwork is signed in your name. If you'd like restoration, there's a reconnect fee. She slammed the receiver down before the woman could finish. Her chest felt tight, not just from the cold. She walked into the living room, where Dale sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone with one leg bouncing lazily. Norma perched beside him, head tilted, her attention swallowed by Instagram reels, a smug smile curling at her lips. My utilities are shut off, Marilyn said flatly. Dale glanced up, feigning confusion. Must have been a glitch. These companies mess up all the time. Norma didn't even look up. Might be your age showing, Marilyn. Those systems can be tricky to keep up with. The dismissal stung. Marilyn's instincts sharpened. She had lived too many years to confuse coincidence with convenience. Something about their calmness, Norma's smirk, Dale's casual shrug, told her this was no glitch. A sharp knock rattled the front door. Tamika Rhodes, her neighbor and closest ally, stood bundled in a wool coat, a thermos tucked under one arm and a flashlight in her hand. Girl, it's colder than a meat locker in here. You look half frozen. Marilyn tried to steady her voice. Utilities are gone. Shut off like I asked for it. Tamika's brows pinched. She set the thermos down on the coffee table, unscrewed the lid, and poured steaming coffee into the cap. The rich smell filled the room, fighting against the metallic tang of cold air. That doesn't just happen. Somebody pulled strings. You know anybody who'd want you stumbling in the dark? Marilyn's eyes drifted toward Dale and Norma, who whispered something between themselves. Laughter pressed through closed lips. The sight made her chest heat hotter than Tamika's coffee. She walked to the side table where yesterday's mail still sat in a neat pile. Beneath a stack of coupon flyers and a late Christmas card, she noticed a thick manila envelope, her name scrawled in shaky handwriting, stretched across the front. The flap was already slit open. Her fingers worked carefully as she pulled the contents free. At first glance it looked official. County letterhead, utility seals, typed forms, but as her eyes scanned the signature line at the bottom, the room seemed to tilt. There, in black ink, was her name, Marilyn Kruger, except it wasn't her handwriting at all. The loops were too wide, the strokes too rushed, the letters strung together like someone imitating her. A forgery. Her breath caught. Tamika leaned over, reading it too. Her eyes widened. Lord have mercy. They forged you, Marilyn. The house was silent except for the paper trembling in her hand, the realization spreading like frost across her skin. And just then, from the couch, Dale muttered something under his breath that she almost didn't catch. A smirk on his face, his eyes locked on hers. You weren't supposed to find that. Marilyn sat at the kitchen table, the forged paperwork spread in front of her like a crime scene. The signature still made her stomach turn, her own name dragged across the page in someone else's hand. She traced the lines with one trembling finger, studying the way the "may" curled too wide, the "k" slanted unnaturally sharp. Whoever did this thought they could mimic her, but she had typed enough memos at the textile mill to know every pen stroke that was hers and every one that wasn't. Tamika poured another cup of coffee from her thermos and slid it across the table. That's not just sloppy, that's deliberate. Whoever forged this wanted you out of the picture. Marilyn nodded stiffly, her mind churning, her gut pointed in one direction. Dale. But accusing her own son outright felt like setting fire to her chest. She needed proof, not suspicion. That afternoon she walked to the county utility office, the forged document folded tight in her purse. The fluorescent lights buzzed above as she waited at the counter. A young clerk with sharp glasses scanned her account. Looks like the account holder change went through last March. All services have been under Dale Kruger Jr. Marilyn's throat dried. He never told me. The clerk tilted the screen. You authorized it. According to this, he spun the monitor, showing another form, her name typed neatly at the bottom, the electronic equivalent of her signature. Her hands curled against the counter. She didn't even own a computer. By evening she was sitting across from a wiry man in a cramped strip mall law clinic. A wall calendar of mountain trails hung behind his desk, papers stacked in controlled chaos across every surface. Trent Jowers introduced himself with a firm handshake, his calm voice steadying her nerves. Let's see what we're working with, he said, pulling the papers close. He scanned them quickly, then tapped the signature line with his pen. This isn't yours. The pressure's inconsistent. See here, whoever signed this was trying to copy you. Marilyn leaned in, her memory flicking like an old projector. She could still see her own signature on her marriage license, her driver's renewals, even her old mill ID. None of them looked like this. Trent typed into his computer, retrieving archived billing history. Your paper bills stopped a year ago. Someone switched you to paperless, rerouted to a private email. His brows tightened as he clicked through. Payments show from your bank account, but refunds, they've been redirected to a different card. Guess whose? Her chest hollowed out. Dale. She sat back, numb. He's been draining me this whole time. Trent's gaze was steady, not unkind. You're not the first parent to face this, but we'll document everything. Fraud leaves a trail. When Marilyn returned home, she found Norma leaning against the kitchen counter, nails tapping against her phone screen. So you went snooping. Norma smirked without looking up. You wouldn't understand online billing anyway. Best to leave it to people who know what they're doing. Marilyn's lips pressed into a line, words locked behind her teeth. Tamika, standing just inside the doorway, answered for her. What I understand is fraud. And I know a magistrate who'll understand it too. Norma rolled her eyes, letting out a laugh too sharp for comfort. Oh please. No one's going to believe some old woman forgot how to pay her bills. But Marilyn wasn't rattled this time. She had seen the proof with her own eyes. Dale and Norma had taken her name, twisted it into their weapon. Now she would twist it back. The next morning, bundled in her coat, she stopped by the neighborhood grocery. She placed a small basket of essentials, bread, milk, eggs, on the conveyor and slid her debit card into the machine. She waited for the familiar beep. Instead, the screen flashed red. Transaction declined, account frozen. The cashier looked at her with quiet pity. Marilyn's stomach clenched. If the lights going out had been the first blow, this was the second, and it cut deeper. Marilyn sat at her kitchen table, staring at her declined debit card as though it were a verdict. Her hands trembled, but not from the cold anymore. The lights had been one thing, an insult, a cruelty, but this was survival. Without money, she couldn't pay bills, buy food, or keep her independence. She picked up the landline, the coiled cord twisted from years of use, and dialed the bank. A pleasant, too cheerful voice answered. First Carolina Credit Union, how can I help? Marilyn steadied her breath. This is Marilyn Kruger. My card was declined. I need to know why. The representative clicked through her account. Looks like your primary checking has been frozen for irregular activity. Several auto-pay accounts were redirected last month. Redirected where? Marilyn's voice cracked sharp enough to make Tamika, sitting nearby, glance up. The line went quiet except for keystrokes. Refunds and credits appear to have been rerouted into a different account number, belonging to a Dale Kruger Jr. The room tilted. Her own son. She gripped the receiver hard enough her knuckles whitened. That's fraud. That's theft. Tamika mouthed, I knew it, and reached over, squeezing Marilyn's forearm. The rep continued, almost apologetic. Ma'am, looks like he used a third-party payment consolidator. It masked his routing information. Clever trick, but still traceable. You'll need to file a fraud affidavit. When she hung up, Marilyn sat perfectly still for a moment, staring at the wood grain of the table. Her whole life had been built on careful order, savings kept tidy, bills logged in a spiral notebook, every receipt tucked into envelopes. Dale hadn't just stolen money, he had spit on that order. That afternoon, she went back to Trent at the strip mall clinic, a folder of crumpled notes under her arm. His office smelled faintly burnt coffee, his desk littered with highlighter-streaked documents. Trent listened, nodding with measured patience as she explained. Then he pulled a stack of forms from his drawer. Here's what we do. First, freeze every asset. Then open a protected account in only your name. I'll walk you through a fraud claim. Step by step. She leaned forward, watching his pen sketch out instructions on a yellow pad. His calm steadiness anchored her, a rope against the undertow. By evening, a knock at the door startled her. Deputy Carla Van stood on the porch in uniform, clipboard in hand, her presence filling the doorway with authority. Mrs. Kruger, I'm here about your financial exploitation claim. Marilyn let her in. The deputy's boots clicked across the hardwood as she took a seat. Her tone was clipped but not unkind. We take these cases seriously. Seniors being targeted by family. It happens more than you think. You're doing the right thing reporting it. Before Marilyn could answer, Norma swept into the room, arms crossed, her perfume too sweet, cloying in the air. She forced a sympathetic smile at Deputy Van. This is all a misunderstanding. Marilyn gets confused with online stuff. Poor thing can't keep track of all her passwords. Marilyn's jaw clenched. She didn't need to defend herself. The deputy's raised brow said enough. Van scribbled notes without acknowledging Norma's performance. When they were alone again, Marilyn spread her receipts across the table, scribbling furiously in a notebook. Every transaction, every date, every amount, her photographic memory spit it out like ticker tape. Tamika watched in awe. Lord woman, you're a walking ledger. They picked the wrong one to mess with. Marilyn didn't smile. Her pencil moved fast, filling page after page until her hand cramped. Order was the only weapon she had left, and she intended to wield it. Later that night, Tamika stepped outside to grab her coat from the car, but as she rounded the hedge between their yards, she froze. Dale stood at his truck, the bed piled with boxes. He heaved another one in, a battered gray file cabinet, its drawers rattling. Tamika's breath hitched. That cabinet wasn't his. It was Marilyn's, the one that held decades of records, insurance, deeds, tax returns. Dale slammed the tailgate shut and glanced around, unaware he'd been seen. Tamika ducked low, heart pounding. By the time she crept back into Marilyn's kitchen, her face was pale. Marilyn, she whispered, her voice urgent. He's got your file cabinet in the truck. Tamika didn't wait. She marched across the yard, boots crunching over frozen grass, and stopped at the edge of Dale's driveway, her breath fogged in the cold night air. "Dale Kruger," she shouted, her voice carrying like a teacher calling down a rowdy class. Dale spun, startled, a strap of the cabinet digging into his arm as he tried to hoist it. His face hardened when he saw her. "This ain't your business, Tamika. That cabinet belongs to your mama." She shot back, jabbing a finger at the dented metal drawers. "Put it back where you found it." Dale smirked, shaking his head. "She doesn't need this junk. Half of it's yellowed papers, the other half is trash. I'm cleaning up what she can't handle." The screen door creaked behind Tamika. Marilyn stepped out, her cardigan wrapped tight, eyes wide when she saw the cabinet. "That's mine," she said, her voice low but cutting. "Every deed, every receipt, every memory. You set it back inside this minute." Dale leaned against the truck like he owned the night. "You're overreacting. This stuff is clutter, Mom. You can't hold on to everything forever." Marilyn's jaw set firm. "You don't get to decide what I hold on to. That's not clutter. That's my life." By the time the argument escalated, Trent's headlights pulled into the drive, gravel crunching under his tires. He stepped out, a stack of folders in hand, his tone calm but sharp. "Mr. Kruger, put the cabinet down. I'll be filing an emergency injunction first thing in the morning. If you remove or destroy those documents, it's evidence tampering." Dale's bravado faltered for the first time, his grip tightening on the cabinet handle. "You lawyers think you know everything. I don't think," Trent said, steady as a metronome. "I know. And Deputy Van will too." As if summoned, headlights swept across the yard again. Deputy Carla Van exited her patrol SUV, notebook ready, uniform crisp. She surveyed the scene quickly. The cabinet, Marilyn's pale face, Dale's defiance. "Mr. Kruger, you're removing your mother's legal and financial records." Dale shrugged. "It's just old paper." Van scribbled. "Noted. Possible evidence removal in an active fraud case. I'll be documenting this." She met his eyes until he looked away. With the deputy watching, Dale had no choice. He heaved the cabinet back onto the porch with a clatter. "Fine. But don't say I didn't try to help." Inside, Marilyn ran her hand across the cool metal, fingers tracing the dents that had followed it through decades of moves. Relief mixed with fury in her chest. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she whispered. The next day she sat at the kitchen table with a yellow notepad, beginning the painful task of reconstructing what might already be missing. Her memory unfurled in sharp detail. An insurance policy from 1989, bank statements from 2007, the mortgage payoff letter with a green ink stamp. She listed them methodically, the scratch of her pen steady, her jaw tight. Norma breezed through the doorway mid-morning, dressed too fine for a day at home, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She stopped at the sight of Marilyn's careful notes. "Oh, look at you," Norma cooed with mock sweetness. "Didn't think you'd remember half of that. Impressive, for someone your age." Marilyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than any retort. That evening, as she tucked the papers back into a drawer, a loose envelope slid from between two folders. She frowned, pulling it open. Inside was a glossy credit card bill addressed to Marilyn L. Kruger, but the purchases weren't hers. Salon visits in Charlotte, boutique clothing, online orders from shops she'd never heard of. Her pulse quickened as her eyes tracked the cardholder name. Underneath hers, printed in smaller letters, "Authorized user, Norma Kruger." The envelope shook in her hands. The discovery of Norma's secret credit card still burned in Marilyn's chest as she sat across from Trent the next morning. The clinic office smelled faintly of copier toner and burnt coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing above like a restless hive. Trent slid a stack of printouts across the desk. "I pulled your full credit report. You need to see this." Marilyn steadied herself, palms pressed flat against the desk. Her eyes scanned the first page. Not one, but 3 separate accounts opened under her name, none of which she had ever touched. The first was a shiny platinum card, maxed out on online home decor orders. the charges scrolling down the page in neat lines: silk curtains, wall art, accent furniture, Norma's tastes written in digits and debt. The second account showed auto shop charges, tires, brake jobs, custom parts. Dale's truck, the one he bragged about keeping all American, had been built on her stolen credit. Her stomach twisted as she flipped to the third. A department store card, balances in the thousands, interest climbing like ivy up a wall. The signatures on the applications were hers, but not hers. The loops wrong, the strokes sloppy, her identity stolen and sold back to her in monthly statements. Trent leaned forward, his voice measured but urgent. This is clear-cut identity theft, Marilyn. They didn't just drain your accounts, they built new ones in your name. That moves this from family squabble to felony territory. She swallowed hard, the papers trembling in her hand. They've been living off me while telling me I'm a burden. He nodded grimly. I'll prepare the documentation for the DA's office. We'll highlight each fraudulent charge, tie it back to them, and show the court you had no knowledge or benefit from any of this. Hours later, Deputy Carla Van arrived at the clinic, her uniform crisp, her presence commanding. She flipped through the files. Trent handed her eyes narrowing at each page. This isn't just messy, it's criminal, she said. Elder exploitation, identity theft, wire fraud. I'll be making a referral to the district attorney today. Marilyn felt both vindicated and hollow. Vindicated that someone finally saw the truth. Hollow that it had come to this, her own son and his wife dragging her through financial ruin. Back home, she sat up at her kitchen table with a red pen and a stack of copies. One by one, she went through the statements, circling each fraudulent charge with steady, deliberate marks. The red ink bled across the pages like open wounds. She whispered under her breath, recalling dates and purchases, her photographic memory refusing to let a single detail slip. Tamika watched from across the table, shaking her head. You're turning their scam into a roadmap, Marilyn. No judge alive is gonna miss this trail. For the first time in weeks, a spark of pride flickered in Marilyn's chest. She had been underestimated, written off, but she was building her defense one crimson circle at a time. The following afternoon, the first strike landed. Dale was at work, his part-time job at a hardware supply store, when a county process server walked in, envelope in hand. Customers whispered as Dale was handed a subpoena in front of his co-workers, the seal of the county court stamped bold across the front. His face went red, his jaw tight as he shoved the papers into his jacket pocket. By evening, Marilyn heard the rumble of his truck pulling into her driveway, gravel spraying under his tires. The headlights cut sharp across her living room walls. She froze, her hand tightening around the edge of the table. The pounding on Marilyn's front door shook the frame, each thud echoing through the small ranch house like a battering ram. Her heart raced, but her hands were steady as she slid her phone across the table and tapped the recorder. She didn't move to answer. Instead, she let Dale's voice pour through the door. "You humiliated me," he shouted, each word ragged with rage. "You had me served in front of my whole damn job. People are laughing at me. Mom, do you hear me?" Marilyn pressed the phone closer to the wood, capturing every syllable. The sound of his boots grinding against the porch boards made the house seem smaller, the walls thinner. "I should have never trusted you," he roared. "All this fuss over some bills, you're ruining your own family." Marilyn's lips tightened. She said nothing. Silence was her weapon, the recorder her shield. Then headlights cut across the yard, washing over Dale's furious silhouette. A county SUV rolled up, gravel crunching, and Deputy Carla Van stepped out, her presence steady as a drawn line. She climbed the porch in 2 strides. "That's enough," she ordered. Her voice was low, controlled, the kind that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Dale spun around. "This is family business." Van squared her shoulders. "Not anymore. You've been served. You're under investigation. Keep yelling, and I'll add harassment to the list." Dale's jaw clenched, but he backed down a step. His eyes flicked past the deputy, landing on the darkened window where Marilyn stood hidden, For a moment, his anger looked less like fire and more like desperation, but it passed quickly. He spat onto the porch rail and stormed toward his truck. As his tail lights disappeared, another pair of headlights appeared. Tamika's beat-up sedan. She hurried up the drive, a stack of papers clutched against her chest. "I printed the court orders," she said, brushing cold air off her coat. "Thought you might want these tonight." Marilyn opened the door at last, her voice hushed but firm. "You're right on time." Inside, Tamika spread the papers across the table while Van filled out her own notes. "Emergency protections," Tamika explained. "Restraining provisions, pending fraud review. They can't legally touch your documents again." The words soothed like balm, but the night's violence still rattled Marilyn's bones. Her phone buzzed just then, Trent's number flashing across the screen. She answered on speaker. Marilyn Trent's calm voice steadied the room. "They're going to drag this out, twist every delay to their advantage. But we stay steady, and we'll win. Tonight proved you're playing smarter than them. Keep everything documented." "I will," she said, glancing at the red-marked papers still spread across her table. By morning she acted on instinct. A locksmith's van idled in her driveway while the man replaced every lock in the house. Marilyn watched closely, memorizing the new key grooves with her photographic mind. That afternoon, a delivery truck dropped off a small brown box. Inside, cushioned by plastic wrap, was the Ring camera Trent had suggested. Marilyn mounted it above her door herself, the quiet click of it locking into place a new kind of security. But outside her small bubble of preparation, Norma was already poisoning the water. On Facebook she posted a selfie with swollen eyes, captioned "Prayers needed, being accused of elder abuse by someone I've only tried to help. Families shouldn't tear each other apart." Dozens of sympathetic comments piled in. Tamika showed Marilyn the post on her phone. "She's spinning it, playing the victim." Marilyn studied the picture. Norma's crocodile tears gleamed on the screen, but Marilyn felt nothing. "Let her cry online," she murmured. "The court will see the truth." Later that week the mail arrived. Amid bills and grocery flyers, one envelope stood out, cream-colored, heavy, embossed with the seal of a local law firm. Marilyn slid it open carefully, her eyes scanning the bold print. "Petition for guardianship of the person and estate of Marilyn L. Kruger." Her knees buckled into the nearest chair. They weren't just stealing her money anymore. They wanted her freedom, her very right to decide her own life. Marilyn sat at the kitchen table, the guardianship petition spread before her like a declaration of war. Each line felt like an insult chiseled into stone: mentally unfit, unable to manage finances, requiring guardianship by family. Her own name, framed in the cold language of incompetence. Trent's voice on the phone cut through the fog. "This isn't about your well-being. Guardianship is a financial strategy, Marilyn. Once they control your estate, they control everything. Your house, your accounts, even your medical decisions." Her fingers tightened around the receiver. "They want to erase me while I'm still alive." "That's exactly what they want," Trent replied. "But affidavits can be dismantled. And Norma's is flimsy." The affidavit lay on top, signed by Norma with neat looping letters. It claimed Marilyn had missed utility payments, forgotten account passwords, repeated herself in conversations, and often appeared disoriented. Lies dressed up in legal jargon. Tamika, sitting across the table, leaned over and tapped the paper with a painted fingernail. "Disoriented, you could recite your phone bill backwards from 1994 if you had to." That evening, Marilyn pulled out a spiral notebook and began compiling her evidence. Page after page filled with neatly written phone logs, doctor's appointment slips, pharmacy records, and her meticulously saved bank statement. Each one a stone in the wall she was building against their lies. She wrote with purpose, her memory so sharp it startled even her. Deputy Van stopped by the next day, her clipboard tucked under one arm. "Guardianship claims against seniors can stick unless you fight them with more than documents," she said bluntly. "What you need is an independent psychological evaluation. If you ace it, that affidavit won't hold water." Marilyn exhaled, the air heavy in her chest. Then that's what I'll do. The evaluation was scheduled at a clinic in town. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old carpet cleaner, the buzz of a vending machine filling the silence. When her name was called, she followed the psychologist into a room lined with bookshelves and soft lamps. He began with simple memory tasks, reciting numbers, repeating lists. Marilyn's answers came crisp, her mind flipping through memories like file drawers. Then came more complex challenges, recounting patterns, interpreting proverbs, recalling paragraphs of text word for word. She sailed through, her responses precise, her tone steady. 2 hours later, the psychologist set down his pen and looked at her over his glasses. Mrs. Kruger, there is no evidence of impairment. In fact, he tapped the report. Your memory recall places you in the 98th percentile, remarkable for any age. Relief washed over her, but it carried a current of steel. She wasn't just proving her fitness, she was dismantling the very foundation of Norma's scheme. Back home, Tamika read the report aloud with theatrical flourish. Remarkable recall, no evidence of impairment. She grinned. That's going to sting when their lawyer reads it. But Marilyn didn't smile. She knew better than to think this battle was finished. Dale and Norma weren't the type to retreat gracefully. That night, as Marilyn watered the small houseplants lined along her windowsill, she heard voices drifting from the yard. She stilled, the watering can halfway in the air. Through the cracked window, she caught Norma's hushed voice, sharp as glass. If the guardianship doesn't work, Norma whispered, then we'll just bleed her out another way. Marilyn's breath caught. She leaned closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. Outside, Dale grunted in agreement. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of wood polish and old stone. Marilyn sat beside Trent, her folder of notes clutched tight, while Dale's attorney stood before the judge, droning about delays and scheduling conflicts. Dale himself leaned back smugly, arms crossed, as though the case were nothing but an inconvenience. Your Honor, the attorney said smoothly, my client requires additional time to gather relevant documentation. We request a continuance of 60 days. Marilyn's pulse quickened. 60 days was 60 more chances for Dale and Norma to bleed her dry. Trent rose, calm but with steel in his tone. Respectfully, Judge, the opposing party has already had months to prepare. My client is elderly and the victim of ongoing fraud. Delaying only compounds the harm. We're filing an emergency motion to proceed. The judge's gavel tapped once, sharp against the echoing chamber. He peered down from the bench. Motion granted. We move forward. Dale's smirk cracked. Outside the courtroom, Tamika intercepted Marilyn with a fresh affidavit in hand. Her neighbor, a quiet man who lived 2 houses down, had come forward. He overheard Norma on her porch. Tamika explained, her voice low but fierce. She was talking about transferring money before the hearing, moving things into her cousin's account. He signed a sworn statement. Marilyn's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with vindication. They think they're clever, but every word is catching up to them. The next hearing brought a curveball. The judge, after reviewing the mountain of filings, consolidated both cases into one: guardianship and fraud, side by side. The matters are intertwined, he said firmly. We'll hear them together. Marilyn glanced at Trent. He gave the faintest nod, as though the decision had been exactly what he'd hoped for. Dale, meanwhile, muttered under his breath, his attorney scribbling frantically. Word traveled fast. Within days, Norma was spotted in the parking lot of a strip mall, phone pressed to her ear, fingers flying as she tried to delete banking apps and social media posts. But Tamika had already anticipated the move. Sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, she took screenshot after screenshot, Norma bragging about her new home upgrades, about truck repairs we didn't even have to pay for. Evidence saved and sealed. She thinks she's scrubbing her tracks, Tamika chuckled grimly as she slid the thumb drive across Marilyn's table. But I've got the receipts. Then came the blow Dale hadn't seen coming. The hardware supply store where he worked received a subpoena for employment records tied to fraudulent purchases. Within days, he was called into the manager's office. Customers had complained, the subpoena had rattled management, and by the end of the week, Dale was packing his things into a cardboard box. Marilyn learned of it when a former co-worker of his called her house directly. He was furious, the man said, almost apologetic. Stormed out shouting about you ruining his life. But Marilyn didn't feel ruined. For the first time in months, she felt the tide shifting. As court loomed closer, her kitchen turned into a war room. Papers stacked in neat piles, every page marked with her meticulous red ink. Trent coached her on phrasing, on pacing, on letting the evidence speak louder than emotion. Deputy Van added pointers of her own. Don't let their lawyer rattle you. Look the judge in the eye. Answer clear and concise. Marilyn nodded, absorbing every word, her photographic memory locking it all in place. She felt prepared, sharper than ever. They had tried to paint her as weak, unfit, but soon she would show them the truth. That night, as she was sorting her notes, the mailbox clanged outside. She stepped into the cold air, retrieving a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside, in neat block letters, one line stared back at her. You're not going to like what I bring to court. Norma's handwriting. The courthouse buzzed like a hive that morning. Hickory's small-town gossip had traveled fast. Neighbors, church friends, even a local reporter squeezed onto wooden benches, polished smooth by years of hearings. The air smelled of coffee and old varnish, thick with anticipation. For once the spotlight wasn't on Dale's excuses or Norma's crocodile tears. It was on Marilyn Kruger. Dale and Norma entered side by side, their lawyer striding ahead in a sharp suit, his tie red as warning lights. Norma's chin lifted high, a smugness that looked brittle under the fluorescent glare. Dale avoided eye contact, but his clenched jaw and restless leg betrayed the storm inside him. Marilyn walked in quietly, flanked by Trent and Tamika, her back straight, a folder tucked under her arm. She wore no drama, only steadiness, her dignity pressed into every step. The murmurs in the gallery softened into silence as she took her seat. Case of Kruger versus Kruger, the clerk called, voice echoing, guardianship and fraud, consolidated. The judge, a tall man with gray hair swept neatly back, glanced over the filings. We'll begin with the petition for guardianship. Mr. Jowers, your client may take the stand. Marilyn rose. The wood creaked beneath her sensible shoes as she stepped forward. Under oath, she sat tall in the witness chair, the Bible's weight still tingling in her palm. Mrs. Kruger, Trent began gently, are you able to manage your daily affairs? Marilyn folded her hands. I've been doing it for nearly 70 years. I still am. Trent handed her a page of transactions. Without looking down for long, she recited them aloud. Dates, amounts, vendors, all from memory. Her voice didn't waver. Each word felt like a lantern lit against the dark accusations. The judge leaned forward, glasses sliding down his nose. Kruger, I've rarely seen such clarity in testimony. The gallery rippled, soft gasps, nods, even a whispered "Amen" from someone in the church pew row. When Norma's attorney cross-examined, he tried to rattle her. Isn't it true, Mrs. Kruger, that you've forgotten to pay bills? That you've struggled with modern technology? Marilyn met his gaze, calm as stone. No, sir. My utilities were cut off because someone forged my signature. My accounts were rerouted by my son. I didn't forget. I was stolen from. Trent passed her another sheet. The psychologist's evaluation. Marilyn read it aloud. No evidence of impairment. 98th percentile memory recall. The words echoed like a bell through the courtroom. The attorney shifted uneasily. No further questions. Now it was Norma's turn. Called to the stand, she adjusted her blouse, plastered on her smile, and swore herself in. Her lawyer guided her carefully, but under Trent's cross-examination, cracks widened. You stated utilities were shut off because Marilyn neglected to pay. Is that correct? Yes, Norma replied, chin high. Trent slid forward the forged paperwork with Marilyn's signature. Then explain this form, signed in her name, dated the day before the shutoff. Norma's eyes darted, her voice faltering. I don't know how that got there. The judge's brow lifted. Answer the question, Mrs. Kruger. Norma stammered, contradictions piling as Trent pressed. Each misstep tightened the noose of credibility. The gallery murmured louder now, neighbors leaning in, church members whispering prayers or muttered disapproval. Then came Dale's eruption. He shifted, arms crossed, then suddenly blurted, "We just needed her to move out, okay? We didn't mean for all this." Gasps broke across the room. His lawyer hissed, "Mr. Kruger, stop talking," but it was too late. His words hung heavy, undeniable. Marilyn sat motionless, her face unreadable, though her heart hammered like a drum. She had waited weeks for the truth to spill from their own lips. Now it had. The judge rapped his gavel for order, his voice cutting clean. Enough. This proceeding has moved well beyond civil dispute. In light of the testimony and evidence, I am pausing to consider a referral for criminal charges. The gallery stilled, every breath caught. Tamika squeezed Marilyn's shoulder. Trent's jaw tightened in grim satisfaction. Dale and Norma, for the first time, looked less like schemers and more like cornered prey. The judge tapped his pen against the bench. We will reconvene after recess. This court must weigh whether to pursue elder exploitation and fraud as criminal matters. The gavel fell again, sharp as thunder. Marilyn exhaled slowly, but the sound of Dale's admission still echoed in her ears. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. The courthouse buzz had barely faded when the district attorney's office announced a formal review of the Kruger case. Marilyn sat at her kitchen table, the radio faint in the background, when the news broke. The words elder financial exploitation, identity theft, fraud, crackled through the static, sounding almost unreal. For months she had been dismissed, gaslit, told she was confused. Now the state itself was naming her the victim. Deputy Carla Van stopped by that afternoon, her presence as steady as the boots on her feet. She laid a thick folder on the table, pages rustling like storm winds. "This is my full incident report," she said. "Every statement, every forged document, every transaction. It's headed to Raleigh for state-level review." Marilyn traced her hand across the folder, the paper cool under her fingertips. "So it's real now," she whispered. "It's been real," Van replied. "Now it's official." Trent arrived an hour later, his tie loosened, briefcase heavy with filings. "We're pushing for restitution," he explained. "Not just to stop them, but to make them pay back every cent they stole. Courts rarely grant it, but with your documentation, we've got leverage." Marilyn nodded, her eyes sharp. "I don't want just survival, I want accountability." While lawyers and deputies built the legal scaffolding, the community built something warmer. Tamika spearheaded a pantry drive at their church, standing at the pulpit with her teacher's voice carrying strong. Marilyn Kruger had her lights cut, her food stolen, her name dragged. But she stood taller. Let's honor her with a full pantry. By Sunday, bags of canned goods, bread and fresh produce filled the church hall, stacked high enough to perfume the air with apples and coffee. Marilyn stood in the back, tears pricking her eyes as she watched neighbors drop donations into bins. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was a symbol. Back at home, she reclaimed what had been stripped from her. The utility office reinstated her accounts fully in her name, every password reset, every access code locked down with her new biometric login. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of the lamp, ordinary sounds and lights now felt like trophies reclaimed. But for Dale, losses piled like bricks. One cold Tuesday morning, a tow truck rolled into his driveway. Marilyn watched from her porch as the men hooked chains around his prized pickup, the truck that had been fueled by her stolen credit. Dale came stumbling out, shouting, face red, but the tow driver never paused. The truck lifted into the air, wheels dangling like a wounded beast. The sound of its departure, chains clanking, engines straining, was a dirge for Dale's stolen victories. Marilyn didn't smile. She simply folded her arms tighter around herself, as if holding in the strength she'd rebuilt. That evening the mail arrived. Among the circulars and bills lay a heavy envelope, stamped with the county seal. She carried it inside, the weight of it pressing against her palm. At the kitchen table, she slid it open with the tip of her scissors. Inside was the judge's ruling in the civil case. Her hands shook as she pulled the papers free. This wasn't just another step. This was the verdict that would decide if her life, her home, her finances, her name was finally hers again. The envelope trembled in Marilyn's hands as she unfolded the judge's ruling. Her kitchen clock ticked too loudly, the only sound in the room, until her eyes landed on the first line. Petition for guardianship, denied. Her breath escaped in a rush. She read further, her eyes darting like they had when she proofed payroll ledgers decades ago. Fraudulent debts voided. Restitution and legal costs awarded. Permanent restraining order issued. Every word was a jolt of electricity running through her veins. For months Dale and Norma had drained her, tried to silence her, painted her as weak. Now the law itself had returned her power. The following week in court, the ruling was read aloud, each sentence echoing through the chamber like a hymn. Dale slumped in his seat, his jaw set tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Norma dabbed her eyes with a tissue that never seemed to get wet. Mr. and Mrs. Kruger, the judge intoned, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution for all fraudulent charges, in addition to covering the plaintiff's legal costs. You are further restrained from contacting or approaching Mrs. Kruger in any form. The gavel fell. Final. Irrevocable. Marilyn stood tall as she exited the courtroom, the crowd parting around her like a current finding its source. Outside, Tamika squeezed her hand so tightly, Marilyn thought her bones might crack. You lit that place up, Tamika said, her voice fierce with pride. Back at the bank, Marilyn turned in her old debit card, the same one that had been drained dry under her son's schemes. The banker handed her a sleek new card, the edges gleaming. Biometric security, he explained. Thumbprint protected. No one can touch it but you. Marilyn pressed her thumb against the reader. The green light blinked, approving her, and for the first time in months she felt untouchable. Days later, a knock came at her door, not frantic fists, but a gentle rap. When she opened it, her neighbor Nora stood there. A wide smile spread across her face. In her hands she carried a box. I saw this and thought of you, Nora said. She lifted out a solar-powered lamp, its panels catching the afternoon sun. For your porch. A light no one can shut off. Marilyn ran her hand across the cool glass, the lamp warm where the sun had kissed it. Her throat tightened. No one will pull my plug again, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. That night she set the lamp on her porch. As the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge foothills, the light flickered on, steady and golden, pouring across her yard. She sat in her rocking chair, wrapped in her shawl, watching that glow defy the darkness. Inside, her kitchen table no longer looked like a battlefield of paperwork. The files were boxed neatly, stacked against the wall, ready for the next phase. Trent arrived late, briefcase under his arm, his tie loosened as if he'd come straight from another case. He set a single sheet of paper on the table. This isn't about what they've already done, he said, sliding it toward her. This is about protecting what comes next. Public record sealing. Asset protection. Once we file this, their reach ends for good. Marilyn stared at the form, the weight of its promise heavier than all the debt they had piled onto her. Her pulse quickened. She thought she had already won. But Trent's paper was a reminder. Victory wasn't just surviving. Victory was locking the door so no one could ever take from her again. The county clerk's office smelled faintly of dust and ink, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Marilyn stood at the counter, her papers neatly stacked, her thumbprint pressed firmly against the final form. With that one signature and a stamp from the clerk, Dale's name was erased from the house title addendum. Her house, the modest ranch her late husband had worked his life to secure, was hers alone again. No son's shadow, no false claim. When she stepped back outside, the air felt brighter, sharper, as if the foothills themselves had exhaled with her. Tamika waited on the bench near the sidewalk, arms folded, a grin stretched wide. So, Marilyn held up the stamped document like a trophy. Done. He's off. By the following week, the utility company reissued all accounts into her sole name. The paperwork confirmed what she already felt humming through the house: the steady buzz of the refrigerator, the whoosh of water running strong again. Dale's access was permanently revoked. Norma, of course, didn't take the hint gracefully. An email slipped into Marilyn's inbox late at night. The subject line, "Can we talk?" The body was long, full of pleading words, twisted apologies about misunderstandings and stress. Marilyn read the first 3 lines, then clicked block. The silence that followed was sweeter than forgiveness. Meanwhile, Trent pushed her beyond defense and into leadership. "You've shown resilience most people only talk about," he told her during one of their evening meetings. He slid an invitation across the table. "We want you on the Senior Legal Aid Advisory Panel. Your story could change how others fight back." Marilyn's fingers traced the embossed letterhead. She thought of the nights she'd sat in the cold, the mornings when her card was declined. Now her testimony would become a weapon for others. The neighborhood celebrated in their own way. Nora and Tamika hosted a full-power potluck, stringing lights across Tamika's backyard, every bulb glowing as a symbol. Tables sagged with casseroles, fried chicken, sweet tea, and homemade pies. Marilyn stood at the center, her cheeks pink from laughter and gratitude, as neighbors toasted her resilience. The music floated into the night, mingling with the hum of crickets and the warmth of belonging. Still, Marilyn wasn't naive. Celebration had to be paired with caution. The next week, she hired a contractor to install motion lights and a security fence around her property. She watched from her porch as the posts went into the soil, the metallic clang of tools echoing reassurance. Each beam of light that flicked on after dusk felt like a sentinel at her side. Then came the moment she hadn't dared hope for. Trent arrived late one evening, his tie loosened, exhaustion etched into his face, but his eyes alive with energy. He set a thick envelope on the table between them. "It's official," he said, voice low but steady. "The district attorney is filing criminal charges. Felony exploitation, identity theft, wire fraud, the whole list. This isn't just civil anymore." The words filled the room like thunder rolling across the hills. Marilyn's hands hovered over the envelope, her breath caught in her throat. The fight that began with darkness and silence was about to blaze into something much bigger. The indictment papers landed like thunder. Felony identity theft, wire, elder exploitation. The words were heavier than iron, stamped with the state seal. Marilyn sat at her kitchen table, her hands spread across the papers, and for the first time she allowed herself a long, slow breath. The fight wasn't just hers anymore. Now the state had taken up her battle. Days later, she was called to testify before the grand jury. The courthouse hallway hummed with fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of old wood and disinfectant clung to the air. Trent walked at her side, quiet but steady. "This is where you show them what they did in full daylight," he said. Inside the chamber, 12 jurors sat in a semicircle, notebooks ready. Marilyn raised her hand, swore her oath, and took the stand. Her folder sat unopened in her lap. She didn't need it. She spoke in measured tones, her voice carrying steady as she listed dates, amounts, and forged signatures from memory. "This charge," she said, tapping one paper, "was for truck repairs in April. Not mine. This one, new furniture. Again, not mine." Each fraudulent purchase became a nail in the coffin of Dale and Norma's scheme. One juror leaned back, shaking his head. Another whispered to his neighbor. The district attorney finally asked, "Mrs. Kruger, how are you able to recall so much detail?" Marilyn folded her hands, her answer simple: "Because I lived it, and because I refused to forget what they wanted me to." The silence after her words was electric. The ripple effects spread quickly. News stations picked up the case, headlines blaring, "Local widow outsmarts family fraud." Dale's name filled every broadcast, his reputation shredded in the very community where he had once strutted with pride. His old boss gave an on-camera statement: if he could rob his own mama, he'd rob anybody. Norma fared no better. Her employer terminated her, after investigators uncovered forged pay stubs and false references tucked into her HR file. The woman who had once sneered from Marilyn's kitchen now found herself escorted out of her workplace with a cardboard box, whispers chasing her like shadows. Back at the clinic, Marilyn became something more than a client. Her recall, her meticulous notes, her relentless will, they turned her into a story told to every new senior who walked through the door, afraid of losing everything. "We've got a Kruger memory on our side," one paralegal joked, and soon it became legend. The judge, reviewing the evidence, signed an order authorizing a lien on Dale and Norma's shared assets, bank accounts, vehicles, even Norma's decorative purchases that still sat in their living room. The law was stripping them bare, piece by piece, the same way they had stripped her. But Marilyn didn't gloat. Instead, she spent quiet evenings under her solar porch lamp, rocking gently, the glow spilling across her yard. Each creak of the chair reminded her she was still here, still standing, still in command of her life. One evening, as she sorted her mail, she found a heavy envelope with a Raleigh return address. The seal of the North Carolina bar glinted on the flap. She opened it slowly, scanning the thick cream paper inside. "You are formally invited as keynote speaker for North Carolina Elder Law Week." Her hand went still. Keynote speaker. She read it twice, then a third time, her heart hammering. The fight that had started in darkness, in silence, in a cold house with no heat, was about to be retold under bright lights, in front of the whole state. The conference hall in Raleigh gleamed with polished wood and chandeliers, the kind of place Marilyn had only ever seen on television. Rows of padded chairs filled quickly. Judges, lawyers, social workers, reporters. The buzz of anticipation rolled through the air like static before a storm. Marilyn stood backstage, her notes clutched loosely in her hand. She didn't need them. Every word was already etched into her memory. Trent gave her a reassuring nod, and Tamika, seated in the front row, flashed her a smile so wide it steadied Marilyn's breath. The MC's voice boomed. "Please welcome our keynote speaker for Elder Law Week, Mrs. Marilyn Kruger." Applause swelled, echoing off the high ceilings. Marilyn stepped onto the stage, the lights hot against her face, the crowd blurring into a sea of expectation. She reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. "My name is Marilyn Kruger," she began, her voice clear, carrying across the room. "And my family thought they could cancel me like an unpaid bill. But what they forgot was that I was the one keeping the lights on." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but soon silence fell as she continued. She spoke of betrayal, of forged signatures and stolen accounts, of the cold morning when her house went dark. She spoke of law as both shield and sword, of neighbors who stood tall, of memory that refused to fade. Her speech, titled "The Cost of Canceling the Wrong Woman," wasn't just testimony, it was battle cry. She ended with a steady gaze sweeping the room. "If they try to dim your light, remember, even in the darkest house, one spark can bring the power back." The room erupted. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Tamika stood in the front row, clapping so fiercely her palms must have stung, her voice carrying above the roar, "That's my girl." By nightfall, the speech hit local news. The headline blazed, "Local Widow Outsmarts Abusers in Courtroom Showdown." Within days, the story spread beyond North Carolina, shared across social media. Strangers sent messages of gratitude. Seniors wrote letters, "You gave me courage. You reminded me I'm not powerless." Trent visited her kitchen soon after, a grin tugging at his lips as he slid another envelope across the table. "I nominated you for Volunteer of the Year at the clinic," he said. "Didn't ask your permission, but I think you'll forgive me." Marilyn shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You lawyers never ask first." An even bigger offer followed. The clinic director called her personally. "We'd like to bring you on part-time," he said. "Educating seniors on fraud prevention, sharing your story, teaching them how to fight back. You'd be saving lives, Marilyn." Her heart stirred. For the first time in years, she felt not just useful, but vital. Not everyone celebrated. A week later, A letter arrived, Norma's handwriting on the envelope. Marilyn slid it open, just enough to see the first line. "I'm sorry for everything. We never meant." She stopped reading, slid the paper back inside, and returned it to sender. Some doors didn't deserve reopening. That evening she stepped onto her porch, carrying a new fixture. With steady hands, she planted a bright floodlight above the steps, wiring it herself, refusing help. When the sun dropped, the bulb burst alive, flooding her yard with unshakable light. She leaned against the railing, arms folded, her face glowing in the beam. For the first time, darkness no longer threatened her. It only proved how far her light could reach. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from the foothills. Marilyn sat on her porch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, the glow of her new security lamp spilling golden light across the yard. An open book rested in her lap, the pages lit as though the world itself wanted her to keep reading. For months she had fought to keep her light on. Now no one could touch it. The creak of familiar footsteps broke her concentration. Tamika appeared at the bottom of the porch steps, a pie tin cradled in her hands. "Apple cinnamon, just out the oven," she said, the steam curling into the cool air. Marilyn smiled, setting her book aside. "If I ever doubted the Lord's goodness, He sent me you with pie to remind me." They shared a laugh as Tamika set the warm tin down on the table, the sugary scent filling the porch. The two women sat side by side, no words needed for a while, just the comfort of company under the watchful beam of light. Marilyn's phone buzzed on the armrest. She reached for it, her thumbprint unlocking the screen instantly. A text from Trent lit up the display. "Case closed, justice served." Her shoulders dropped in relief. Though she had already won battles in the courtroom, those final words, "case closed," landed with a finality she hadn't dared hope for. The next morning, she wrote her first check under her new debit card. Not to Dale, not to Norma, not to any obligation they'd left in her name. Instead, she donated to the county's Energy Access Fund, the one that helped struggling families keep their heat and lights on. She filled in the donor name line carefully. Anonymous. For once her identity wasn't the weapon, it was the gift. Later that week she sat at her kitchen table drafting the first edition of her new newsletter. She had titled it with a grin, "The Lit List, Elder Justice Monthly." Each article was a spark tips for spotting fraud, stories of resilience, advice from Trent, even recipes Tamika insisted were essential for survival. "Knowledge is power," Marilyn typed in bold, "and power is the one thing no thief should ever take from you." The newsletter went live through the clinic's website. Within days, emails poured in from seniors across the county, some scared, some inspired, some simply saying thank you. Marilyn read every one, her eyes burning with tears, her heart steadier than it had been in years. One afternoon at the clinic, a young woman lingered after a workshop, nervously twisting her hands. She looked no older than 30, exhaustion carved into her face. "Mrs. Kruger," she said softly, "I just wanted to tell you, you made me believe I could fight back. They've been taking from me for months, and I thought I was powerless. But after hearing you, I know I'm not." Marilyn reached across the table, squeezing the woman's hand. "You've got more strength than you think. I promise you that." As the woman walked away, Marilyn felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, not just relief, not just survival, but legacy. Her fight had lit sparks in others, and those sparks would spread. That night, she returned to her porch, her book forgotten, as she watched the yard bathed in steady light. The lamp hummed softly, a promise against the dark. She leaned back in her rocker, the blanket wrapped close, Tamika's pie cooling on the table beside her. "They thought I needed their light," she whispered to the quiet, the mountains rising dark in the distance. Then she smiled, the glow catching in her eyes. "Turns out I was the fuse the whole time."